Hi, good morning. We're reading The Mystery of History, Volume 4. We're on page 61. I think I might have put page 62 the other on our thing, but...
You did. Well, you almost did.
Okay, so we're on step 20, finally, which is the Constitution of the United States. We've been working our way through the American Revolution. Ms. Hobar says, I've not much room left, and what a shame because there's so much more to this story. So it looks like we might have to read a whole other thing on the American Revolution, but we can't do that right this moment. You see, a few years after the Revolutionary War, the states of the Confederation were arguing because the Articles of Confederation were not working. So 55 delegates, that means people to represent the states, although they weren't called states then, they were called the States of Confederation, gathered together in Philadelphia to solve these problems. And this has been called the Constitutional Convention. It started on May 14th in 1787. So this is 22 years after the Boston Massacre. That's a long time. So imagine if the Boston Massacre had happened when you were born, you'd be a full-grown adult, almost, as we consider an adult being age 25, not 18. A full-grown adult by the time that they are starting the Constitution. That's a really long time. The first item of business was to elect a chairman. That was easy. All agreed it should be George Washington. The second item was not too difficult either. Within only 5 days, the convention agreed to toss the idea of a confederation and replace it with a new 3-pronged federal government. This idea was urged by the Virginians. So the Virginians, I guess, were really pushing this idea. The new government would have a built-in balance of power. The balance of power, the power would be balanced between 3 branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. So the legislative includes Congress, where they make laws. The executive is the president, and the judiciary is the Supreme Court, which interprets the laws. Now I'm just going to say, why do we have a different branch to interpret the laws that are made? Isn't the best person to interpret the law the person who made the law?
Yes. Yeah.
Now I've always been taught the balance of power and how we need a balance of power so that no one branch can overrule and start ruling the country by itself. But it just seems to me that the best person to interpret it is the person who made it.
Because they know.
They know the intention of the law. Why do we have somebody else to interpret it? Well, they don't know what your intention was. That's like God makes the law. We just talked about the 10 Commandments. And then he has somebody else interpret them. Well, the best person to tell us what the interpretation of the 10 Commandments is God himself. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll move on. I digress. I'm getting on my little soapbox here. Yes.
Yeah, since God made them, the best person who knows exactly how to follow those laws is God.
So.
And God the Father.
Yes. So we're just going to put that little feather in our cap, meaning we're just going to put a pin in it. We're going to just mull over that because, when I was growing up and I was taught all of this stuff, we weren't taught to look at it through the lens of God's perspective, which is truly the perspective. We were taught to just, I don't even know what the perspective was. I guess whatever perspective they were teaching from, a championing democracy. And I'm not saying I'm against democracy, but I do want to make sure that we are kind of...
Isn't democracy bad?
No, it can and it can't be. It can be bad in the sense of democracy is a voting for where the majority basically rules. We vote for what we want. So what the majority wants is what happens. But what if the majority votes for something evil? Well, the majority of the people want something evil. So my current thought, and this is just a thought, I could be wrong, is that democracy is good in the sense of we need to decide, are we going to be ruled by God or not? Because if we're not going to be ruled by God, we voted to rule ourselves. And if we voted to rule ourselves, we're headed down the wrong path, period.
Yes.
No buts.
But, because democracy is basically, are you listening?
Yes.
Democracy is basically saying it's the people who are governed are consenting. They're meaning, I'm agreeing to be governed. I'm agreeing that we're going to vote for this president, and whatever the majority votes for, that's who's going to rule. Although there is the balance of power, but he's going to be the leader of the nation. So, but what's happened is, what it's created in our culture, in our country, is two sides of a pendulum. It's created basically two political parties and a swinging between one and the other. And what does that give us a picture of?
The devil. Because the devil
No.
swings from one to the other.
No. It gives us a picture of a swinging between extremes. What swings between extremes?
The devil.
No. The flesh. The flesh loves extremes. So, and what I think we need to see is that, that has happened, and why, where have we taken a misstep? And the misstep, I believe, could be a lot of people that disagree, but the misstep, I believe, is that we've used a democracy to rule ourselves instead of using the concept of democracy to vote, do we consent to be ruled by the Lord? Because when in Israel, in the Bible, in the biblical times, at first they all agreed, yes, we will, remember, we just read this, we will obey all that the Lord said. The Lord is our God. We will do everything he said. But then, once they got into the promised land, what did they see? And what did they start to want?
All the other things, like kings.
They wanted a king. And the Lord said, you don't need a king. I'm your king. You don't need to be like all those other nations. And they said, no, we want a king. And they kept demanding it, and they kept demanding it. And what God said is, if you're not going to agree to be ruled by me, I will show you what you're agreeing to. You can be ruled by a king, but it's not going to go well for you. And it didn't. So that's where I think, can you sit down, please, and look at me so I can think that you're paying attention? What that is showing us is that there is that element of democracy. God's not going to rule us if we don't want to be ruled by him. We call that God being a gentleman. He's not going to demand his way. He's not going to force us to obey him. At first they were like, yes, we're going to obey the Lord. They were out there in the wilderness. Then they got to the promised land. And they saw all the other countries who, by the way, were not following the Lord.
Just to
Who?
get there.
Who the Lord had told them, you need to go drive out these inhabitants. These are idol worshipers. But they looked at them and they said, they have a king. We need a king. And he said, no, I'm your king. And they said, no. So he didn't make them. He didn't force them to be ruled by him. That's where democracy comes in. Do you see what I'm saying? The concept of democracy is, yes, we will all vote and we'll agree to be governed by you. And God says, yes, I will only rule you if you agree. He's not going to make us. But there are only two options. Either you're going to be ruled by God, or you're going to decide how to be ruled by yourselves. And in America, we have decided that God is not king. Now, our laws used to be based on Christian principles. I say used to because we're quickly speeding away from that. But, Caleb, focus. Our laws used to be based on the 10 Commandments. Used to. But what happens when God is no longer king is that it's very different when God is king versus, we'll just take, it'd be like, just say in England, because they have a king, the king is ruling, or the king hands you a piece of paper with the 10 Commandments on it and say, you go ahead and rule based on this. It's very different to be ruled by the king versus the principles of what the king has said. Because if the king is no longer there, now you can twist those principles into all types of things, or even just say, that's not even what we're about anymore. That one's out. You see what I'm saying? We're no longer ruled by God. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if we ever were, but the Christian principles that we used to be founded on, we are speeding quickly away from those. Okay. We need to make it through this, and we're only at the first paragraph. Like a triangle with 3 sides, equal sides, each branch is supposed to be equal in function. This idea originated from Montesquieu, a French political thinker during the Enlightenment, and there it is. What did we read about what the Enlightenment was based on?
Things that learn about God.
Reasoning without God. That's why I want us to kind of push back, because in our country, we really idolize this concept of the Constitution and how it was founded. But we really need to say, let's look at this and say, this balance of power is based on a political thinker of the Enlightenment, meaning he reasoned this without taking into consideration how God thinks or how God operates. That means God is not considered. That's a big problem. The next item of business for the convention would be the hardest. It took 4 months and prayer, as suggested by Benjamin Franklin, for small states and large states to agree on how they could be fairly represented in the newly formed Congress. I'm glad they prayed, but what they should have done is open their Bibles to look and see, how does God rule? Should we put God on the throne? Because that's what got Israel in trouble, was they said, we want a king. We can do this without God being the king.
And we have a president.
Yes, they didn't want a king because the United States didn't want a king because they didn't want a tyrant anymore. Because the king can quickly turn into a tyrant if it's given too much power. So they had a president, but what didn't they do?
They didn't.
God is not on the throne, period. As soon as you step away from that, you're stepping away from the ruler that you need. Should each state get 1 vote? Should each state get 2 votes based on size? Nothing seemed fair until a great compromise was reached. There were 2 houses of Congress to be created, one based on size and one not. And still today, the Congress operates just like this. In the Senate, each state has 2 representatives, and those are 2 senators. But in the House of Representatives, or they call it just the House, each state, the number of representatives in each state is based on the population, meaning California has a whole lot of people. So California gets more representatives than Alaska. Alaska is a very large state. But because there aren't as many people in Alaska, they don't get as many representatives in the House. But in the Senate, everyone has equal representatives. So it's like a compromise. They do both. It's based on the population and also not based on the population, which seems great, seems good. But we're still stuck in this thing today of swinging between the extremes of political parties in both the Senate and the House fighting with each other. By the time all the delegates agreed on the new Constitution, only 39 were left to sign it. Those who signed it on September 17th in 1787 are honored, among numerous others. These are given the title of the Founding Fathers of the United States. They worked hard to earn the title. Each delegate had to go home and present the plan for ratification. Ratification means the state. Now, the representative then went back to their state and said, okay, this is what we decided on. Now we need to vote to either say yes or no. And that would take another year. 1788, a majority of the states agreed to approve the Constitution. It was essentially it was like a contract, and it was made official on March 4th in 1789. It wasn't long after that George Washington was elected to be the first president to fill the executive branch. He placed his hand on a Bible, opened Deuteronomy 28, and took the oath of office on April 30th in 1789. A fitting role for a wise, congenial former general who had contributed so much to the new nation. 8 years later, something extraordinary occurred. George Washington volunteered to end his term. So today, a president may only be in office for 8 years.
4 years per term.
Yes, 4 years per term. But George Washington here is volunteering to end his term because he was becoming more like a king than a president.
I don't think they had terms.
I don't think they did either. Writing a famous farewell address to the American people and stressing the importance of religious and morality, he would not live out his life like the king in a new land. Without a fight among his heirs and without waiting until his death, and without a coup, George Washington would hand over to the American people the decision of who would be the next president. This is truly the birth of a new nation with new ideals. So she's saying it's because the people are deciding who will be the president. And again, I push back against that idea because we can either rule ourselves or God can be our ruler. And at this point, it's clear it only takes a small step away from what God has said before we're no longer doing what God has said. Is this now the end of the lesson? Almost. I have one more very important document. As good as the new Constitution was, it still was not perfect. By December 15th in 1791, 10 amendments were added. They're called the Bill of Rights because they relate to the personal rights of Americans. The American people can thank James Madison for helping to construct the Bill of Rights. He saw the extreme importance of the First Amendment rights, which are the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to assemble, the right to petition. Additionally, other personal rights are acknowledged in the remaining 9 amendments. Again, and I'm thankful for these freedoms, but these freedoms, well, like the freedom of press, that's just gone crazy today. It's just all bad news. People
Freedom press.
to be able to print things that are going on. I can say what I want to say and publish it. I don't have to be censored. Like the king can't say, no, that's a bad article about me, so you can't publish that. Because before, if the king was doing something illegal, you couldn't publish it because they were going to you would get in trouble for publishing a bad article about the king. But now you can, but that's gone way to the extreme, which is it's nasty mudslinging. Do you know what mudslinging is?
I know what
Fleeing poo.
Mud. Fleeing. It's basically mudslinging is making each other dirty with mud, just throwing dirt at each other, tearing each other down in just bad ways. Like I didn't read the article because I'm not going to encourage these type of articles, but the article was Biden stumbles on the platform.
Like he stumbled.
Yeah, like he tripped a little bit. Why would you, it shows an extreme lack of respect and extreme dishonor for our leaders, because as soon as people, and it's all across our culture, as soon as you make a small mistake, it's just, write about it. They blow it up. It's cast out over all the nation. Biden has tripped. He has tripped. Let's watch it again. We've got a video of it. And let's watch it again. Here he is tripping right here.
That is hilarious.
And then they wonder why people don't respect Americans. We tear ourselves down. We tear our own leader down. And we tear each other down. And then we wonder why there's so much fighting. And that's what I'm saying. These rights, I'm so thankful to be able to say what I'd like to say. But when the heart isn't governed by the Holy Spirit, what it comes out of our mouths? Only evil. Not only evil, but a lot of evil all the time. And
If it was only evil, it would be very bad.
Yes, that's true. And you can see that even though these freedoms have been allowed, what's happened is we're not being guided by the Holy Spirit as a nation. And because of that, we've really headed down the wrong path. And I think it's really evident. Anyway, additionally, there are other personal rights. Now, she asks, has the Constitution been successful? As it was originally written, it fell short of protecting rights of all Americans, because even the First Amendment rights did not include rights for slaves or women, period. And in fact, dark brown skinned people at first did not have the right to vote at all. And women did not have the right to vote. Because they weren't considered worthy of voting. We're not able to...
Only white, brown skinned men.
Only light khaki colored skin, usually of European descent, were allowed to vote. And you had to be a man, and you had to be of European descent. And how did they determine that, since there was no DNA test? They just looked at you and said, yeah, you look like it. But did you know that the slaves and dark brown skinned people were given the right to vote before women?
Yes, I did know.
That's how much the devil attacks women. Tries to keep women down. You know what that means? We're dangerous. We're dangerous to the devil's plan. Because he really fights to keep us down. Although after many a bloody protest, meaning there was a lot of fighting, these exclusions were corrected in the 13th and 19th Amendments, but those we'll be talking about more later. Overall, the passing of dozens of other amendments. I feel like that should be a clue that our Constitution, it has strayed from what the Lord has said, because we keep having to amend it. There's another amendment. Oh, here's another amendment. Oh, here's another amendment.
How many amendments did I start out with?
Well, it started out with just one amendment, but they keep adding amendments. I don't know how many there are right now. We'll have to look. Definitely 20. But that should be a clue. Hey, maybe we should have based it on things in the Bible, how the Lord rules Israel in the Bible. Or just ask the Lord to be the ruler. But overall...
It's not like you're going to lose your power.
What do you mean?
Like, it's not like you're going to... It's not like everybody's going to be dropped.
Okay. Overall, with the passing of dozens of other amendments, the Constitution does stand as the oldest Constitution in working order. So she says it's been immensely successful. I do not agree. I'm thankful for the freedoms, but our country is far away from worshiping the Lord, and that's most important. Again, does the Lord make us worship Him?
No.
Yeah, we have a freedom to worship Him. And I do believe that we should kind of decide as a nation, are we going to worship together the Lord or not? Because if not, we're going our own way. If so, then we need to do things the Lord's way, because we're kind of like waffling here in between. All right, that's it for now. Sorry for such a long one today. That was really long. All right, goodbye.